The quiet feeling that life is never enough. Have you ever noticed that even when nothing is wrong, something still feels missing? Not in a dramatic way, not as despair, but as a low, persistent sense that life is slightly underwhelming, slightly incomplete, slightly off. You wake up, you function, you meet expectations, you do what needs to be done. And yet, beneath it all, there is a restlessness that never quite leaves. A feeling that whatever this is, it should feel fuller than it does. You try to ignore it. You tell yourself to be grateful. You remind yourself that others have it worse. From the outside, your life may even look good, stable, safe, respectable. But none of that touches the inner question that keeps resurfacing in quiet moments. Is this really it? And no matter how much progress you make, how much you improve, how much you achieve, the question does not disappear. It waits patiently. This feeling is rarely talked about honestly. Society has no patience for it. If you admit that life feels insufficient, you are quickly labeled ungrateful, negative, broken, or unmotivated. You are told to think positively, to set bigger goals, to stay busy, to distract yourself. But what if the problem isn't your attitude? What if it's your awareness? Some people feel life is never enough, not because they want too much, but because they see too clearly. They notice how desire evaporates once fulfilled, how happiness fades faster than discomfort, how achievement brings relief, not meaning, how stability does not automatically create peace. They sense that something in the structure of existence itself resists satisfaction. This awareness doesn't announce itself loudly. It doesn't come with panic or crisis. It comes quietly, gradually, through repetition, through watching excitement turn flat, through realizing that pleasure has an expiration date, through noticing that every solution becomes another routine, every answer another question. Over time, you stop expecting life to deliver lasting fulfillment, not because you've given up, but because you've been paying attention. People who feel this way are often misunderstood. They are not lazy. They are not depressed in the conventional sense. They are not incapable of joy. They simply cannot lie to themselves for very long. Forced optimism feels dishonest. Motivational slogans feel shallow. Promises of happiness feel exaggerated. They want something real, even if it's uncomfortable. This doesn't make life unbearable. It makes it heavier, more complex, more sober. You begin to value quiet over excitement, solitude over performance, depth over stimulation. You stop measuring life by how good it feels and start measuring it by how tolerable, how honest, how endurable it is. Not because you want less, but because you no longer believe in illusions. This is the psychology we are entering. Not the psychology of despair, but of restrained expectation. Not the refusal to live, but the refusal to pretend. The mindset of people who no longer expect life to complete them, save them, or satisfy them, only to be carried, endured, and understood. And once you see life this way, you cannot unsee it. From here, everything changes. Number 1, you feel desire never truly satisfies you. At some point, you begin to notice a strange pattern repeating itself throughout your life. You want something badly. You imagine it clearly. You convince yourself that once you have it, something inside you will finally settle. It might be success, love, freedom, money, recognition, peace, or simply a different version of yourself. The wanting feels intense, urgent, almost meaningful. It gives your days direction. It gives your suffering a justification. And then eventually, you get what you wanted. And almost immediately, something feels wrong. Not traumatically wrong. Not disappointing in an obvious way. Just thinner than expected. The relief is real, but it is brief. The satisfaction exists, but it is shallow. What you imagined as a turning point turns out to be a pause. The hunger quiets for a moment, then returns in a different shape. You find yourself thinking, Is this really all it was supposed to feel like? This is not ingratitude. It is awareness. People who feel life is never enough begin to recognize that desire itself is the engine of dissatisfaction. Wanting creates tension, but fulfillment does not resolve it permanently. It only redirects it. The mind is already moving on before the moment has even fully landed. The future rushes in and steals the present. You notice that anticipation often feels stronger than possession, that the chase carries more energy than the arrival. Over time, this realization becomes unsettling. If desire cannot satisfy you, then what exactly are you chasing? You start to see how much of human life is organized around this endless cycle. Want, pursue, achieve, adapt, want again. Society depends on this rhythm. Economies thrive on it. Identities are built around it. People introduce themselves through what they want, what they are working toward, what they are becoming. But if you are paying attention, you begin to sense the exhaustion beneath it all. This awareness creates a quiet distance between you and others. You watch people celebrate milestones with genuine excitement, and while you don't judge them, you feel detached. You've been there. You know how fast the glow fades. You know that the mind never stays still long enough to rest inside fulfillment. You don't feel superior. You feel tired. Desire stops feeling like a promise and starts feeling like a mechanism. A force that keeps you moving but never lets you arrive. And once you see this clearly, it changes how you relate to everything. You still want things. You still pursue goals. But something inside you no longer believes that fulfillment is waiting at the end. You stop expecting completion. You stop expecting closure. This can feel disorienting. Desire once gave your life momentum. Without believing in it fully, you feel unanchored. You are not driven by hope in the same way others are. You no longer trust motivation blindly. You begin to live more cautiously, more inwardly, more honestly. You pursue things because they pass the time, because they reduce suffering, because they feel meaningful in motion, not because you expect them to save you. This is where many people misunderstand you. They think you lack ambition. They think you've given up. They don't see that you are simply no longer fooled. You have learned that desire is not a solution. It is a condition, one that cannot be cured, only understood. And once you understand it, life no longer feels like a ladder leading somewhere better. It feels like a terrain you must learn to walk without expecting the ground to change. Psychology number 2. You notice happiness fades faster than discomfort. There is another realization that slowly settles in once you stop lying to yourself. Happiness, when it arrives, is light, fleeting, fragile. It does not root itself deeply. It passes through you like a weather pattern, leaving little behind. Discomfort, on the other hand, lingers. It embeds itself. It hums quietly beneath your days. Even when things are going well, unease waits in the background, patient and persistent. At first, you try to fight this truth. You assume something is wrong with you. You believe that if you could just fix your mindset, improve yourself enough, or arrange your life correctly, happiness would finally stay. But experience keeps contradicting this belief. Good moments come and go quickly. Bad moments stretch out. Loss echoes. Anxiety repeats. Satisfaction dissolves. People who feel life is never enough begin to notice that happiness requires effort to maintain, while discomfort sustains itself effortlessly. You must actively protect joy. You must remind yourself of it. You must defend it against doubt, comparison, memory, and expectation. Pain needs no defense. It installs itself quietly and makes itself at home. This creates a subtle shift in how you relate to life. You stop chasing happiness as a permanent state. You stop believing in emotional arrival points. You recognize that most of what we call happiness is contrast, the absence of pain, the brief pause between struggles. It is real, but it is temporary by nature. And the sooner you accept that, the less betrayed you feel when it fades. This doesn't make you pessimistic. It makes you measured. You stop expecting emotional consistency. You stop demanding that life feel good in order to feel valid. You begin to understand that comfort is not the baseline of existence. Unease is, and happiness, when it appears, is a visitor, not a resident. This realization also changes how you see others. You notice how much energy people spend trying to prolong good feelings and avoid bad ones. How much denial goes into positivity. How much effort it takes to maintain appearances. You see the exhaustion underneath forced optimism. You sense how fragile many people's happiness really is, how dependent it is on circumstances staying favorable. For you, something shifts. You no longer see discomfort as a failure. You stop panicking when happiness fades. You stop asking, "What did I do wrong?" Instead, you think, "Of course this didn't last. It never does." There is a strange calm in this acceptance. A heavy calm, but a stable one. Life becomes less about chasing peaks and more about tolerating valleys. You start measuring your days not by how good they feel, but by how manageable they are, how quiet, how bearable. You learn to appreciate moments of neutrality, the absence of sharp pain, the presence of simple functioning. This may sound bleak to others, but to you, it feels honest. Happiness becomes something you allow, not something you pursue. When it comes, you don't cling to it. You don't ask it to stay. You let it pass through you without expectation. And when it leaves, you are not shocked. You are not angry. You are prepared. This is the psychology of endurance, not despair, not surrender, just realism. You stop expecting life to reward you emotionally for surviving it. You stop believing that joy is owed to you. You learn to live without demanding that existence justify itself. And in doing so, life becomes quieter, heavier, but also less deceptive. Psychology number 3. You feel restless even when life looks fine. There comes a moment when you realize that nothing is technically wrong. Your life functions. You wake up. You go to work or school. You eat. You talk to people. You meet expectations. From the outside, everything appears stable, even successful. If someone were to look at your situation objectively, they might say you're doing well. And yet, inside, something refuses to settle. This restlessness does not announce itself loudly. It is not panic. It is not despair. It is quieter and more corrosive than that. A persistent sense that you are slightly misaligned with your own life. That you are playing a role that fits well enough to pass, but not well enough to feel true. You move through your days with a low-grade tension, as if waiting for something undefined, something that never quite arrives. People who feel life is never enough often struggle most during periods of stability. Crisis at least explains discomfort. Hardship gives unease a reason. But when life looks fine and the emptiness remains, there is nowhere to place the blame. You cannot point to a clear problem. You cannot justify the feeling. And so it turns inward. You start questioning yourself. You wonder if you are ungrateful. You tell yourself that you should be satisfied. Others would love to have what you have. Others would trade places with you without hesitation. This comparison only deepens the discomfort. It adds guilt to restlessness. You feel wrong for feeling wrong. But the restlessness persists because it is not caused by circumstances. It is caused by awareness. You have begun to sense that stability does not equal fulfillment, that structure does not equal meaning, that functionality does not equal alignment. You can survive inside a life that is not truly yours, but you cannot rest there. This is why comfort often feels suffocating to you. Predictability dulls you rather than calming you. Routine does not soothe, it numbs. You notice how easily days blur together when nothing demands your presence. You feel yourself slowly disappearing into repetition, and this frightens you more than struggle ever did. You may attempt to fix this restlessness by changing external variables. A new job, a new relationship, a new environment, a new goal. And sometimes these shifts help temporarily. They create movement. They disrupt stagnation. But eventually, the same feeling returns. Because the restlessness was never about where you were. It was about how you were living. People who feel life is never enough are not dissatisfied because they want more pleasure. They are dissatisfied because they want depth. They want to feel engaged, implicated, alive inside their own choices. A life that simply works is not enough if it does not resonate. You do not want chaos for its own sake. You want authenticity, even if it costs you comfort. This is also why advice rarely helps. When people tell you to relax, to enjoy what you have, to stop overthinking, it feels hollow. They are offering sedation, not resolution. You do not need distraction. You need honesty. You need to know whether the life you are living is truly yours or merely acceptable. The restlessness remains until you confront this question directly. Not dramatically, not impulsively, but truthfully. You begin to ask yourself where you are betraying your own instincts, where you are choosing safety over truth, where you are enduring rather than engaging. And this questioning, once it begins, cannot be undone. Life may look fine, but fine is not alive. And once you have tasted awareness, fine will never be enough again. Psychology number 4. You question the value of success and achievement. At first, success seems like the obvious answer. If life feels empty, perhaps you simply haven't achieved enough yet. Perhaps meaning is waiting at the next milestone, the next promotion, the next accomplishment, the next recognition. You internalize the belief that progress will eventually resolve the restlessness, that achievement will quiet the unease. So you try, you work, you push, you discipline yourself. You sacrifice time, energy, parts of yourself. And sometimes it works. You reach the goal. You achieve the thing. You arrive at the place you once imagined would change everything. And once again, the feeling returns. People who feel life is never enough begin to notice something unsettling about success. It promises significance, but delivers maintenance. It gives you something to protect, rather than something to inhabit. The moment you achieve something, it becomes fragile. It requires defense. It demands continuation. What once motivated you now burdens you. You realize that success is not an ending. It is a loop. Achieve, maintain, repeat. There is no moment where you are allowed to stop. No point at which the mind says, now you can rest. Achievement feeds the same mechanism as desire. It keeps you moving without letting you arrive. This realization changes how you see ambition. You notice how much of it is borrowed rather than chosen. Goals inherited from parents, peers, culture, or fear. You see how often success is used as a shield against uncertainty, a way to avoid asking deeper questions. If you are busy achieving, you do not have to confront whether the direction itself makes sense. You begin to sense that many people are running not toward meaning, but away from emptiness. Achievement becomes a distraction, a socially approved escape from existential discomfort. And while you respect the effort it takes, you no longer believe it solves the problem it claims to address. This does not mean you reject achievement entirely. It means you no longer worship it. You stop expecting it to justify your existence. You stop measuring your worth through outcomes. You recognize that success may improve conditions, but it does not answer the deeper question of why you are here or how you want to live. This shift can be isolating. In a world that celebrates achievement obsessively, questioning its value makes you appear unmotivated or cynical. But internally, it feels like clarity. You are no longer willing to trade your inner life for external validation. You are no longer willing to confuse movement with meaning. You start asking different questions. Not what can I achieve, but what can I endure honestly? Not how far can I go, But what kind of life can I tolerate living repeatedly? These questions are quieter, less impressive, but far more dangerous. They strip away illusions. They remove the scaffolding of borrowed purpose. Success loses its glamour when you see how little it touches the core of your experience. You realize that a life can look impressive and still feel hollow. That accomplishment can coexist with emptiness. That progress can occur without alignment. And once you see this, you cannot unsee it. For people who feel life is never enough, the problem is not that they lack achievement. It is that they refuse to let achievement lie to them. They sense that meaning cannot be outsourced to milestones, that purpose cannot be accumulated, that no amount of external success will resolve an internal misalignment. And so they begin the harder work, not building a life that looks good, but learning how to live inside it without pretending. Psychology number 5. You feel more at peace when you re-alone. There is a strange relief that arrives only when you are finally by yourself. Not loneliness, relief, the quiet kind. The kind that feels like loosening a tight knot in your chest that you didn't even realize had been there all day. When you close the door, turn off the phone, step away from people, expectations, and conversations, something inside you exhales. The pressure eases. Your shoulders drop. Your thoughts slow down just enough to become bearable. People often misunderstand this feeling. They assume that wanting to be alone means you dislike others, that you are antisocial, damaged, or incapable of connection. But for people who feel that life is never enough, solitude is not rejection. It is recovery. It is the only space where you do not have to perform, explain, impress, or pretend that you are satisfied with a life that quietly leaves you unfulfilled. When you are around others, there is an unspoken demand to match their energy, their optimism, their pace. Conversations orbit around achievements, plans, pleasures, and future happiness. You are expected to smile at stories that do not move you, to celebrate goals that feel hollow, to nod along to a version of life that never quite fits the shape of your inner world. Even when people are kind, the constant social noise can feel exhausting, like being trapped in a play where you forgot your lines but are expected to keep acting anyway. Solitude removes that demand. Alone, you do not have to justify why you feel empty, even when things are going well. You do not have to explain why success feels thin, why pleasure fades so quickly, why desire keeps regenerating instead of satisfying you. There is no one watching, measuring, or misinterpreting your silence. You are finally allowed to be exactly as you are, restless, reflective, unsatisfied, without being corrected. Psychologically, this peace comes from the absence of comparison. Around others, you are constantly reminded of where you should be by now, how you should feel, what you should want next. Even subtle comparisons. Who is happier? Who is progressing faster? Who seems more fulfilled? Quietly reopen the wound of never enough. Alone, that wound is not poked every minute. The world stops demanding proof that your life is working. In solitude, your thoughts become deeper, but also more honest. You may still feel emptiness, but it is a clean emptiness, not one contaminated by expectation. It is the difference between staring into your own void versus having someone insist that the void shouldn't be there at all. When you are alone, the emptiness is allowed to exist without being judged. And paradoxically, that acceptance makes it easier to carry. There is also a sense of control that returns in solitude. Around others, time fragments, conversations interrupt thought, obligations pull attention outward, noise scatters focus. Alone, time stretches. You regain ownership over your inner rhythm. You can think without interruption, feel without needing to translate emotion into language, exist without the pressure to be productive or entertaining. For someone who feels life is never enough, this control is grounding. It reminds you that while you may not control meaning, success, or satisfaction, you still control how closely you listen to yourself. This preference for solitude often develops slowly. At first, you may still seek people. The leading connection will finally fill the gap. But after enough conversations that leave you drained, enough social moments that feel strangely empty, enough laughter that fades too quickly, you begin to notice a pattern. You feel better after being alone than after being surrounded. Not happier, calmer, more stable, less fractured. Solitude becomes a place where you can confront life without distractions. It strips away the illusion that fulfillment will arrive through social approval or shared excitement. It forces you to face the uncomfortable truth that the dissatisfaction lives inside you, not in your circumstances. This confrontation is painful, but it is also honest. And honesty, even when heavy, is less exhausting than pretending everything is fine. For people who feel life is never enough, solitude is not an escape from life. It is a return to it, stripped down, quiet, and real. It is where you stop chasing stimulation and start listening to the underlying ache. And while solitude does not solve the problem of never enough, it gives you the clarity and emotional space to live with that problem without being overwhelmed by it. Psychology number 6. You feel too aware to fully enjoy simple pleasures. There was a time when pleasure felt simple. A time when small things could fully absorb you. Food tasted richer, laughter felt effortless. Moments didn't immediately slip through your fingers. But at some point, awareness crept in. And once it arrived, it never left. Now, even during enjoyable moments, part of your mind stays awake, watching, analyzing, anticipating the end. You still experience pleasure, but it no longer completes itself. There is always a second layer beneath it, a quiet awareness that the feeling is temporary, that it will fade, that it cannot last. You enjoy, but you do not surrender. You feel, but you do not dissolve into the moment. Something inside you keeps standing just outside the experience, observing instead of resting. This heightened awareness is not arrogance or pessimism. It is psychological depth. You see patterns where others see moments. You sense the cycle beneath pleasure, anticipation, satisfaction, decline, return of desire. Because you understand the cycle, pleasure loses its illusion of permanence. And without that illusion, it cannot fully intoxicate you anymore. Simple pleasures rely on forgetfulness. They require you to forget time, consequence, repetition, and impermanence. But your mind refuses to forget. Even while smiling, part of you is already aware of the next desire forming. Even while relaxing, part of you knows this calm will not last. This awareness doesn't ruin pleasure outright. It thins it, dilutes it, makes it feel incomplete. Psychologically, this creates a subtle alienation from everyday happiness. You watch others lose themselves in entertainment, comfort, routine joys, and you wonder how they do it so easily. How they can repeat the same pleasures without growing restless. How they can believe that another weekend, another purchase, another achievement will finally be enough. You don't feel superior. You feel disconnected. This disconnection often brings guilt. You tell yourself you should be grateful, that nothing is wrong, that life is objectively good. And yet the awareness persists. Gratitude feels intellectual rather than emotional. You can name reasons to be content, but naming them does not generate satisfaction. The problem isn't in gratitude. It's that awareness has outpaced pleasure. With awareness comes a sensitivity to emptiness. You notice the gap that opens as soon as pleasure peaks. You notice how quickly the mind starts reaching again, wanting the next thing, the next distraction, the next stimulation. You see that pleasure doesn't solve dissatisfaction. It only pauses it. And once you see that clearly, you can't unsee it. This makes life feel heavier. Not because it is worse, but because it is more exposed. You no longer have the protective illusion that happiness is just one more experience away. You understand that no amount of repetition will permanently quiet the sense of not enough. And this understanding removes the comfort that simple pleasures once provided. Yet this awareness also brings a different kind of depth. While pleasure may feel thinner, meaning becomes sharper. You begin to value moments not for how good they feel, but for how real they are. A quiet walk, a long conversation, a piece of music that mirrors your inner tension. These don't distract you from awareness. They align with it. They don't promise fulfillment. They offer resonance. People who feel life is never enough are often misunderstood as joyless. In reality, their relationship with pleasure is simply more honest. They don't mistake stimulation for satisfaction. They don't confuse enjoyment with meaning. Their inability to fully enjoy simple pleasures is not a flaw. It is the cost of seeing too clearly. This clarity is lonely, but it is also grounding. It forces you to stop chasing happiness as a solution and start understanding life as something to endure, interpret, and navigate consciously. Pleasure becomes something you appreciate without depending on. Something you touch lightly, knowing it cannot save you, and knowing it doesn't have to. In this way, awareness does not destroy pleasure completely. It transforms it. Pleasure becomes quieter, less dramatic, less addictive. And while it may never feel enough, it becomes real, no longer a lie you cling to, but a moment you acknowledge and let pass without resentment. Psychology number 7. You distrust constant positivity and optimism. There comes a point when optimism stops feeling like hope and starts feeling like denial. You notice it first in the language people use. Everything must be framed as a lesson, a blessing, a win. Pain has to be justified immediately, transformed into something uplifting before it is even allowed to exist. Suffering must be rushed through, repackaged, made palatable. And something in you quietly resists this. Not because you enjoy darkness, but because you recognize dishonesty when you see it. You have learned, slowly and often painfully, that constant positivity does not remove suffering. It merely hides it. It places a social pressure on people to smile while they are breaking, to express gratitude while they are empty, to pretend they are fine when they are not. You see how optimism becomes a moral obligation rather than a genuine emotional state. If you are unhappy, you are told you are thinking wrong. If you are tired, you are told to reframe it. If you are struggling, you are told to be grateful it is not worse. And over time, this relentless insistence on positivity begins to feel cruel. What unsettles you is not happiness itself, but how cheaply it is sold. You notice how phrases like, "everything happens for a reason," are often used not to comfort, but to silence. They shut down conversation. They dismiss complexity. They allow people to walk away from discomfort without engaging with it. You begin to understand that optimism is often less about truth and more about control. A positive narrative keeps things smooth, productive, non-threatening. It prevents deeper questions from being asked. You also notice how optimism is unevenly distributed. It is easiest to preach from a position of comfort. Those who have not felt prolonged uncertainty, loss, or existential fatigue tend to offer positivity as advice, not as something earned. To you, this feels hollow. Real understanding does not rush to reassurance. It listens. It stays with the discomfort. It allows the weight of things to be felt without immediately trying to escape it. Your distrust grows not from cynicism, but from experience. You have seen how forced optimism creates guilt. When people cannot live up to the promise of happiness, they assume the failure is theirs. They feel defective for not feeling fulfilled. They blame themselves for reactions that are often reasonable responses to an indifferent or overwhelming world. You sense that this is one of optimism's quiet harms. It turns structural, existential, and emotional realities into personal shortcomings. You are not opposed to hope, but you no longer accept it in its artificial forms. You understand that genuine peace cannot be built on denial. Real resilience does not come from pretending everything is okay, but from facing what is not. You respect those moments of clarity where someone admits they are lost, tired, uncertain. These moments feel more human than 1,000 motivational slogans. This is why constant positivity feels dishonest to you. It simplifies what is complex. It demands emotional conformity. It treats suffering as a problem to be solved quickly, rather than a condition to be understood. You have learned that darkness does not disappear because it is ignored. It waits, and often it deepens. In rejecting forced optimism, you are not choosing despair. You are choosing honesty. You are choosing to see life as it is, not as it must be sold. You understand that some days do not improve. Some wounds do not transform into wisdom. Some losses do not reveal hidden gifts. And accepting this does not make life meaningless. It makes it real. You have come to value emotional truth over emotional comfort. You would rather feel something difficult than repeat something false. And in that quiet refusal to pretend, you find a strange kind of integrity. You are no longer chasing happiness as an obligation. You are allowing yourself to exist without the constant pressure to justify your pain with a smile. Psychology number 8. You use art, music, or thought to cope. When life begins to feel heavy in a way that language cannot easily carry, you turn toward something that exists beyond explanation. Art, music, thought, not as hobbies, not as entertainment, but as lifelines. These are not distractions for you. They are temporary shelters, places where the weight of being conscious becomes bearable, if only for a moment. You notice that when you engage deeply with art, something inside you loosens. A piece of music can say what you cannot. A painting can hold a feeling you do not know how to name. A line of writing can echo a thought you believed was yours alone. In these moments, the isolation softens. You realize that someone else, somewhere, has felt this too. And that recognition matters more than solutions. You do not use art to escape reality completely. You use it to endure it. There is a difference. Escapism denies what exists. Art acknowledges it, reshapes it, gives it form. When you listen to music late at night, it is not because you are avoiding your thoughts, but because you are finally allowing them to surface safely. When you read or write, it is not to forget yourself, but to understand yourself more clearly. You sense that beauty offers a pause from the relentless pressure to function. In a world that constantly demands productivity, clarity, and answers, art allows ambiguity. It allows sadness without justification. It allows complexity without resolution. This is why it feels honest to you. Art does not insist that everything will be okay. It simply says, this exists. This feeling is real. And that is enough. You also notice how art slows time. While listening to a song or staring at a painting, the future briefly stops demanding your attention. The past loosens its grip. You exist in a narrow, fragile present where nothing needs to be solved. For someone who feels life is never enough, this pause is not trivial. It is restorative. It gives your nervous system a moment of rest from constant evaluation and longing. Thought plays a similar role for you. You think deeply not because you enjoy overanalyzing, but because reflection is how you metabolize experience. You revisit ideas, question assumptions, explore philosophies not to feel superior, but to make sense of your inner landscape. Thinking becomes a way to organize the chaos, to trace patterns in what otherwise feels random and exhausting. You understand that these coping mechanisms do not cure the underlying dissatisfaction. They are not meant to. They are moments of relief, not permanent solutions. And you have stopped demanding more from them. You no longer expect art to save you or philosophy to deliver certainty. You let them be what they are, companions in endurance. There is also a quiet humility in this. You are not chasing transcendence. You are seeking relief, a small easing of pressure. a moment where the question of meaning does not need to be answered. You accept that beauty is temporary, that the feeling will fade, that the heaviness will return. But you also know that those brief moments matter. They make the wait survivable. You notice how people who dismiss art as indulgent often underestimate how hard it is to keep going without something that speaks to the soul. Art does not remove pain, but it gives pain a place to go. It prevents it from collapsing inward. It externalizes what would otherwise remain suffocating. In this way, art, music, and thought become acts of quiet resistance. Resistance against numbness, against shallow optimism, against the demand to be constantly functional and cheerful. They allow you to remain sensitive in a world that rewards emotional dullness. They allow you to feel deeply without apologizing for it. You may not believe life is generous or fair. You may not expect fulfillment or lasting happiness. But through these small refuges, you have learned how to endure without hardening completely. And in a world that often feels like too much and not enough at the same time, that endurance is its own kind of meaning. Psychology number 9. You feel compassion comes from shared suffering. Over time, you begin to notice that your compassion does not come from optimism or moral teaching, but from pain. Not abstract pain, not imagined hardship, but lived experience. The kind that humbles you. The kind that strips away illusions about fairness, control, and reward. You recognize suffering not as an exception, but as a common condition, quietly shared by almost everyone you encounter, even those who appear successful, confident, or fulfilled. This awareness changes how you see people. You stop dividing the world into winners and failures, strong and weak, deserving and undeserving. You see instead a spectrum of endurance. Everyone is carrying something. Some carry it openly. Others hide it behind competence, humor, or ambition. And once you see this, cruelty becomes harder to justify. Judgment feels shallow. Moral superiority feels obscene. Your compassion is not sentimental. It does not manifest as grand gestures or dramatic empathy. It is quieter than that. It is restraint. It is patience. It is the refusal to reduce someone to their worst moment or their most visible flaw. You understand that people are often not malicious, just wounded. Not lazy, just exhausted. Not indifferent, just overwhelmed. You also understand that suffering teaches limits. It shows you how fragile certainty is, how temporary stability can be. You remember moments when you needed understanding and did not receive it, when your pain was minimized, reframed, or dismissed. Those memories sharpen your sensitivity. They teach you what not to do. They remind you that sometimes the most humane response is silence, presence, or simply not making things worse. This is why your compassion feels different from pity. Pity places you above someone. Compassion places you beside them. You do not imagine yourself immune to the struggles you witness. You know how easily circumstances could shift. You know how thin the line is between coping and collapsing. And because of this, you do not romanticize strength. You respect survival. You notice that many moral systems emphasize virtue without acknowledging suffering. They focus on how people should behave, not on what they are enduring. You find this incomplete. To you, ethics without empathy is hollow. Rules without understanding become weapons. True compassion requires acknowledging how pain shapes behavior, how fear distorts choices, how prolonged stress erodes patience and hope. Your view of responsibility becomes more nuanced. You still believe people are accountable for their actions, but you no longer believe accountability must be harsh to be effective. You understand that shame rarely heals, that punishment rarely transforms, that people do not improve because they are condemned, but because they are seen clearly and treated as human. You also recognize that compassion does not mean constant forgiveness or self-sacrifice. You have learned, often the hard way, that empathy must coexist with boundaries. Understanding someone's pain does not require you to absorb it or excuse harm. Compassion is not the erasure of self. It is the recognition of shared vulnerability without self-betrayal. There is a quiet sadness in this awareness. Once you see how much suffering exists beneath the surface of ordinary life, you cannot unsee it. Casual cruelty becomes unbearable. Indifference feels loud. You begin to notice how easily people hurt each other while protecting their own comfort. And yet, instead of hardening, you soften. Not because the world deserves it, but because hardness would cost you more. Your compassion is not hopeful in the conventional sense. You do not believe suffering will disappear. You do not believe humanity is steadily improving. But you believe in moments of understanding. You believe in small acts of gentleness that do not fix the world, but make it slightly more bearable for someone passing through it. In this way, compassion becomes less about saving others and more about refusing to add to the weight. You cannot remove suffering, but you can avoid multiplying it. You can choose not to mock vulnerability. You can choose not to exploit weakness. You can choose to speak carefully, to listen longer, to judge less quickly. This compassion is born from endurance. It is the quiet solidarity of those who know life is heavy and continue anyway. And while it does not make life feel complete or fulfilling, it makes it feel less cruel. For someone who feels life is never enough, that reduction in cruelty matters. It is not joy, but it is humanity. And sometimes, that is enough to keep going. Psychology number 10. You don't expect life to be fair. At some point, you stop asking life to be fair. Not because you are bitter, but because you are honest. You have seen enough randomness, enough imbalance, enough unearned suffering and unearned privilege to abandon the idea that life operates on moral symmetry. Effort does not guarantee reward. Good intentions do not protect you. Pain does not arrive proportionally. And once you accept this, a strange shift occurs. You lower your expectations, not out of defeat, but out of clarity. You stop measuring life by happiness or fulfillment or success. You measure it by endurance, by whether you can get through the day without breaking completely, by whether the weight remains carryable, by whether there are still moments, however small, that make the burden lighter. This perspective is often misunderstood as pessimism. It is not. Pessimism expects disappointment. You expect nothing. And in that absence of expectation, you find a kind of stability. When you no longer demand that life justify itself, you stop feeling personally betrayed by its indifference. You stop interpreting hardship as failure. You stop asking what you did wrong to deserve it. You also stop chasing emotional extremes. You are no longer obsessed with happiness because you have seen how fragile it is. You have watched joy dissolve without warning, how easily it is disrupted by loss, illness, or time. You understand that building your life around a feeling that cannot last is a recipe for constant disappointment. Endurance, by contrast, is sustainable. Endurance does not require constant positivity. It does not demand that you feel good. It only requires that you continue, that you adapt, that you find ways to make the experience tolerable. This might mean routines, solitude, art, limited hope, or carefully chosen connections. It might mean lowering ambitions, redefining success, or learning when to disengage. You notice that people who expect fairness often suffer twice. They suffer from events themselves, and then again from the shock that those events occurred at all. You suffer once. You feel pain, but you are not surprised by it. You do not ask the universe to explain itself. You do not demand meaning where there may be none. This does not make you numb. You still feel disappointment, grief, frustration, but these feelings move through you differently. They do not shatter your worldview. They confirm it. They fit into an understanding you already have, that life is not a promise, but a condition. You also begin to respect small mercies, not miracles or transformations, but modest reliefs. A quiet morning, a good conversation, a song that resonates, a moment of rest without guilt. These are not highlights. They are pauses, and you learn to value pauses more than peaks. There is a groundedness in this approach. You are no longer living in anticipation of a future that will redeem everything. You are no longer postponing peace until some condition is met. You accept that many things will remain unresolved, that some questions will never have answers, that some longings will never be satisfied. And strangely, this acceptance brings a form of calm. When you stop expecting life to be fair, you stop fighting it on those terms. You redirect your energy toward adaptation rather than resistance. You focus on what can be managed, not what should have been different. You also become more forgiving of yourself. You stop demanding constant progress or improvement. You understand that surviving certain periods is an achievement in itself. You stop comparing your inner experience to other people's external appearances. You recognize that everyone's threshold is different, and yours has been tested in ways that may not be visible. Endurance does not mean resignation. It means persistence without illusion. It means staying present without demanding satisfaction. It means choosing to continue even when the story does not improve, even when meaning remains unclear, even when life feels perpetually unfinished. For someone who feels life is never enough, this shift is profound. You stop asking life to fill you. You stop asking it to complete you. You stop asking it to make sense. You ask only that it remains survivable. And in that modest request, you find a way forward. Life may never feel complete. Desire may never fully rest. Happiness may never last. But endurance allows you to remain here without lying to yourself. It allows you to live honestly within limitation. And that honesty, more than fulfillment, becomes the quiet foundation on which you stand. We arrive at the end of this exploration, having walked the difficult, shadowed corridors of human desire, awareness, and dissatisfaction, and we are left with a single profound understanding. Life is rarely complete, rarely fair, and rarely enough. The world does not pause for our suffering, nor does it reward us proportionally for our effort, sensitivity, or insight. What it does offer is experience, the raw, unfiltered, often brutal reality of existence, and the opportunity to endure it with clarity, courage, and self-knowledge. The people who feel life is never enough are not broken. They are awake. They see the machinery of desire, the fleeting nature of pleasure, the limits of achievement, and the constant undercurrent of unease that runs beneath everyday life. They recognize that happiness is ephemeral, that fulfillment is temporary, and that meaning is not handed down. It must be forged in the crucible of experience. To live fully, then, is not to chase satisfaction, but to endure wisely, to act intentionally, and to cultivate a life of depth rather than superficial abundance. Awareness is both a blessing and a burden. To notice the brevity of joy, the inevitability of discomfort, and the quiet ubiquity of suffering is to confront the truth that the world is not designed for comfort or ease. Yet within this recognition lies power. By understanding the mechanics of our own desire, the fleeting nature of pleasure, and the pervasiveness of struggle, we gain the ability to act with intention rather than impulse, to choose endurance over denial, and to find peace in moments, however small, of clarity or beauty. Compassion, too, is born from this understanding. Those who endure, who feel deeply, and who recognize the universality of struggle are uniquely positioned to connect with others, not through judgment or pity, but through shared awareness and empathy. Pain becomes a bridge, not a barrier. Vulnerability becomes a point of connection rather than shame. In this way, the dissatisfaction that haunts those who feel life is never enough also gives rise to the deepest forms of human understanding and connection. Ultimately, the lesson is stark and liberating. Life will not be enough, and it will never guarantee satisfaction. But life can be endured. Life can be observed, reflected upon, and navigated with honesty and courage. Life can be filled with fleeting moments of beauty, with compassionate acts, with small victories, and with the quiet realization that surviving and doing so consciously is itself a profound achievement. To live as someone who feels life is never enough is to live fully awake. It is to embrace the tension between desire and dissatisfaction, to recognize the impermanence of pleasure, and to cultivate a resilience that does not depend on comfort or external validation. It is to walk forward in the knowledge that life is often harsh, frequently incomplete, but always lived moment by moment, breath by breath, with awareness and integrity. And so, the truth stands. Life may never satisfy completely, it may never be fair, and it may never be enough. But in enduring it, in witnessing it with clarity, and in acting with conscious presence, we achieve something deeper than happiness. We achieve understanding. We achieve strength. We achieve a life lived honestly, fully, and relentlessly, one moment, one breath, one act of awareness at a time. This is the quiet power of those who navigate the world aware that life is never enough. They do not demand fulfillment. They do not wait for justice. They do not rely on perfection. They survive. They endure. And in doing so, they transform the emptiness of expectation into the richness of conscious existence. Life's insufficiency is no longer a curse. It is the canvas upon which a fully aware, fully human life is painted.